What if one morning, the world woke up, and every drop of oil on Earth simply vanished without warning or explanation overnight? No explosions, no disasters, just silence, as the most important resource in human history suddenly stops existing everywhere at once. Within minutes, people wouldn't notice anything unusual, but the systems holding modern civilization together would already begin to fail silently. Because oil isn't just fuel, it's hidden inside almost everything you use every single day, without even realizing it. And the moment it disappears, the chain reaction begins, slow at first, but impossible to stop once it has started. This wouldn't be chaos instantly, it would be something far more terrifying. A silent collapse spreading across the entire planet. What if one morning, the world woke up, and every drop of oil on Earth simply vanished without warning or explanation overnight? No explosions, no disasters, just silence, as the most important resource in human history suddenly stops existing everywhere at once. Within minutes, people wouldn't notice anything unusual, but the systems holding modern civilization together would already begin to fail silently. Because oil isn't just fuel, it's hidden inside almost everything you use every single day, without even realizing it. And the moment it disappears, the chain reaction begins, slow at first, but impossible to stop once it has started. This wouldn't be chaos instantly, it would be something far more terrifying. A silent collapse spreading across the entire planet. Within hours, the first signs appear as airplanes are grounded worldwide, unable to refuel, leaving thousands stranded mid-journey across different continents. Pilots receive emergency orders, flights are canceled instantly, and global air traffic slowly disappears from the skies without any clear explanation. At sea, cargo ships carrying food, fuel, and essential goods begin drifting, unable to reach ports without the energy needed to continue forward. Highways become silent as trucks stop running, cutting off the flow of goods that millions of people rely on every single day. Deliveries stop, stores receive nothing, and the invisible system that feeds cities begins collapsing faster than anyone expected. Gas stations are quickly overwhelmed as people rush to refill, only to discover that the supply has already disappeared. Panic spreads as lines grow longer, but no fuel ever comes, and people begin to understand something is seriously wrong. Emergency vehicles start facing shortages, and even critical services begin slowing down as fuel becomes unavailable everywhere. Without transportation, cities lose connection to the outside world, becoming isolated systems unable to sustain themselves. And as movement stops, the modern world begins to freeze, not from destruction, but from the inability to keep going forward. As transportation collapses, the next system to fail is electricity, the silent force powering everything people depend on every second. Power plants struggle to operate without fuel, and one by one, entire cities begin losing electricity without warning. Lights go out in homes, offices, and streets, leaving millions in sudden darkness they were never prepared for. The internet starts failing, communication breaks, and people can no longer access the digital world they rely on daily. Phones lose signal, networks crash, and the world becomes disconnected in ways never experienced before. Within a day, food supply chains begin collapsing as transportation and refrigeration systems fail completely across the world. Fresh food spoils quickly without refrigeration, and stores run out faster than they can be restocked. Farmers can't deliver crops, and production slows dramatically as machines stop working without fuel. Panic buying spreads, and shelves are cleared within hours as people try to secure whatever remains. Water systems begin failing as treatment plants lose power, making clean drinking water harder to access. Within a day, food supply chains begin collapsing as transportation and refrigeration systems fail completely across the world. Fresh food spoils quickly without refrigeration, and stores run out faster than they can be restocked. Farmers can't deliver crops, and production slows dramatically as machines stop working without fuel. Panic buying spreads, and shelves are cleared within hours as people try to secure whatever remains. Water systems begin failing as treatment plants lose power, making clean drinking water harder to access. Hunger starts spreading silently, affecting millions who rely on daily supply systems to survive. Cities begin feeling pressure as resources run low faster than anyone predicted. Governments attempt to control the situation, but without infrastructure, solutions become nearly impossible. The illusion of abundance disappears, revealing how fragile the system truly was all along. And for the first time, people begin to fear something deeper than shortage: survival itself. Hospitals begin struggling within hours as backup generators fail, and critical systems start shutting down without fuel to keep life-saving equipment running. Machines stop moving, assembly systems fail, and the products people depend on every day can no longer be manufactured at scale. Plastic becomes scarce almost immediately because oil is hidden inside packaging, electronics, medical tools, and countless objects used in modern life. Chemical plants shut down next, cutting off fertilizers, industrial materials, and essential compounds needed to support agriculture, manufacturing, and healthcare systems. Construction slows to a halt as heavy equipment loses power, and building projects everywhere are abandoned in unfinished silence. Even simple items become difficult to replace, from containers and cables to protective gear, because the entire industrial system depends on oil-based materials. Supermarkets are emptied within hours as families grab whatever they can carry, knowing tomorrow there may be nothing left to buy. Arguments turn into fights, and fear begins replacing trust as neighbors compete over food, water, batteries, and anything useful for survival. Police struggle to control crowds, but without fuel, power, and communication, even law enforcement begins losing control of the situation. Rumors spread everywhere, and without reliable information, people believe the worst, making fear more dangerous than the crisis itself. Some stay home and hide, while others flood the streets searching for food, fuel, answers, or anyone still offering protection. Infections spread rapidly as sanitation systems fail, and the lack of clean equipment puts both patients and staff at serious risk. Healthcare workers become exhausted and overwhelmed, unable to keep up as the system collapses faster than anyone expected. The system designed to save lives begins failing everyone, turning hospitals from safe places into centers of uncertainty and fear. And without oil, modern medicine loses its foundation completely, leaving humanity vulnerable in ways never seen before in history. As fuel disappears, factories begin shutting down across the world, and production lines that once ran non-stop suddenly fall silent without warning. Looting begins in some neighborhoods as desperation rises, and the line between survival and lawlessness starts disappearing overnight. Communities that once felt safe begin turning inward, locking doors, blocking roads, and treating strangers as possible threats. The real collapse is no longer infrastructure alone. It is the collapse of trust between ordinary people trying to survive. And when fear becomes stronger than order, society doesn't break all at once. It fractures person by person, block by block. As fuel, power, and trust disappear, countries begin turning inward, cutting connections and isolating themselves from a world they can no longer support. Looting begins in some neighborhoods as desperation rises, and the line between survival and lawlessness starts disappearing overnight. Communities that once felt safe begin turning inward, locking doors, blocking roads, and treating strangers as possible threats. The real collapse is no longer infrastructure alone. It is the collapse of trust between ordinary people trying to survive. And when fear becomes stronger than order, society doesn't break all at once. It fractures person by person, block by block. As fuel, power, and trust disappear, countries begin turning inward, cutting connections and isolating themselves from a world they can no longer support. Remote regions are abandoned first, left without support, while major cities absorb what remains and grow more unstable by the day. Oceans no longer connect civilizations. They separate them, turning distance into danger and every journey into an impossible risk. The globalized world that once felt connected begins breaking into isolated fragments, each one struggling to survive on its own. And as the planet falls into silence, humanity discovers how fragile unity really was when everything holding it together disappears. By now, the collapse is no longer partial. Every major system that once kept civilization stable is failing at the same time. Food is scarce, medicine is limited, power is gone, and communication has nearly disappeared across entire regions of the world. Governments still exist, but many can no longer protect, supply, or even fully communicate with the people depending on them. Cities become survival zones, where every remaining resource matters, and ordinary routines are replaced by fear, scarcity, and desperate decisions. Families break apart searching for food, safety, or shelter, while communities struggle to hold together under unbearable pressure. The systems once trusted to deliver order, comfort, and security are now only broken structures people can no longer rely on. What remains is not one dramatic ending, but 1,000 slow failures happening everywhere at once across the modern world. The illusion of control disappears completely, revealing how fragile civilization always was beneath its polished surface and constant motion. Humanity is forced into a new reality where survival matters more than progress, and every day becomes harder than the last. And in that silence, the world finally understands that civilization was never permanent. It only worked as long as everything kept moving. The world does not end with fire, explosions, or one final moment. It ends quietly as everything people trusted stops working forever. No engines, no signals, no supply lines, just a silent planet, slowly forgetting how modern life was ever supposed to function. What disappears first is not comfort, but certainty. Because once systems collapse, nobody knows what tomorrow is supposed to look like anymore. The collapse of oil becomes the collapse of order, and the collapse of order becomes the collapse of everything people once called normal. Roads remain, but nothing moves. Hospitals remain, but nothing works. Homes remain, but they no longer feel safe or permanent. Humanity survives for a while, but survival is no longer living. It becomes a daily fight against hunger, fear, darkness, and uncertainty. And in that silence, people begin to understand how fragile civilization truly was, beneath all its speed, power, and confidence. The scariest part is not losing oil. It is realizing how much of human life was built on something so easy to lose. Because the end would not feel dramatic at first. It would feel slow, confusing, cold, and far too quiet to ignore. And maybe the real question was never what happens when oil disappears, but whether our world was ever strong enough without it. Life support machines stop working one by one, leaving doctors powerless as patients who depend on them begin to slip away. Without oil, the production and transportation of medicine stops, creating immediate shortages of essential drugs across hospitals and pharmacies everywhere. Ambulances run out of fuel and stop responding, slowing emergency services to a point where help can no longer arrive in time. Doctors are forced to make impossible decisions, choosing who can be saved and who cannot, as resources become critically limited. Surgeries are canceled, equipment fails, and hospitals begin operating in darkness without the technology they rely on every single day. Banking systems freeze, transactions stop, and money becomes useless as digital infrastructure disappears. Emergency broadcasts begin, but without stable power, even warnings fail to reach everyone in time. Cities fall into confusion, not knowing what's happening, as information disappears faster than people can react. Without electricity, modern life stops instantly, leaving behind a world no one knows how to navigate anymore. And this is only the beginning of something much worse, something no system was ever designed to survive. Manufacturers try to adapt, but without raw materials, fuel, and transportation, every backup plan collapses faster than expected. Global production falls sharply, and shortages spread beyond energy, affecting medicine, technology, farming, housing, and nearly every part of daily life. The modern economy weakens rapidly as industry stops creating the goods that keep cities functioning and societies feeling stable. And once industry falls, civilization loses more than products. It loses the ability to rebuild, repair, and recover from everything collapsing around it. As shortages grow worse, fear spreads faster than facts, and entire cities begin slipping into panic as people realize help may never come. International flights are gone, shipping routes collapse, and the movement of goods between nations slows until it nearly stops completely. Borders tighten rapidly as governments try protecting what little they still control, even as their own systems begin failing from within. Nations that once depended on trade now face shortages alone, cut off from food, medicine, technology, and critical resources they cannot replace. Communication between governments weakens as networks fail, satellites lose support, and the world becomes less coordinated with every passing hour. Alliances begin to fracture, not because leaders want conflict, but because survival forces every country to think only of itself.